صلوات. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات.
बर मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद। अऊज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम। बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद। बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम। अन जाबिर इब्न अब्दुल्लाह अल-अंसारी अन्नहु क़ाल अन फ़ातिमत अज़-ज़हरा अलैहिस्सलाम बिन्त रसूलिल्लाह सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि व आलिहि क़ाल समिअतु फ़ातिमत अन्नहा क़ालत दख़ल अलैया अबी रसूलुल्लाह फ़ी बाज़िल अय्याम फ़क़ाल अस्सलामु अलैकि या फ़ातिमतु फ़क़ुल्तु अलैकस्सलाम क़ाल इन्नी अजिदु फ़ी बदनी ज़ुअफ़न फ़क़ुल्तु लहु अईज़ुका बिल्लाहि या अबताउ मिनज़्ज़ुअफ़ फ़क़ाल या फ़ातिमतु इअतीनी बिलकिसाइल यमानी फ़ग़त्तीनी बिह फ़अतैतुहु बिलकिसाइल यमानी फ़ग़त्तैतुहु बिह वसिरतु अंज़ुरु इलैहि वइज़ा वजहुहु यतलअलउ कअन्नहुल बद्रु फ़ी लैलति तमामिही व कमालिही फ़मा कानत इल्ला साअतन वइज़ा बिवलदी अल हसन क़द अक़बल वक़ाल अस्सलामु अलैकि या उम्मा फ़क़ुल्तु व अलैकस्सलाम या क़ुर्रत ऐनी व समरत फ़ुआदी फ़क़ाल या उम्मा इन्नी अशम्मु इंदकी राहियतन तय्यबतन कअन्नहा राहियतु जद्दी रसूलिल्लाह फ़क़ुल्तु नअम इन्न जद्दका तहतल किसा वअक़बल अल हसन नहवल किसा वक़ाल अस्सलामु अलैका या जद्दा या रसूलल्लाह अतअज़नु ली अन अदख़ुल मअका तहतल किसा फ़क़ाल व अलैकस्सलाम या वलदी व या साहिब हौदी क़द अज़िनतु लका फ़दख़ल मअहु तहतल किसा फ़मा कानत इल्ला साअतन वइज़ा बिवलदी अल हुसैन क़द अक़बल वक़ाल अस्सलामु अलैकि या उम्मा फ़क़ुल्तु व अलैकस्सलाम या वलदी व या क़ुर्रत ऐनी व समरत फ़ुआदी फ़क़ाल ली या उम्मा इन्नी अशम्मु इंदकी राहियतन तय्यबतन कअन्नहा राहियतु जद्दी रसूलिल्लाह सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि व आलिहि फ़क़ुल्तु नअम इन्न जद्दका व अख़ाका तहतल किसा फ़दना अल हुसैन नहवल किसा वक़ाल अस्सलामु अलैका या जद्दा अस्सलामु अलैका या मन इख़्तारहुल्लाह अतअज़नु ली अन अकून मअकुमा तहतल किसा फ़क़ाल व अलैकस्सलाम या वलदी व या शाफ़िअ उम्मती قد أذنت لك فدخل معهما تحت الكساء فأقبل عند ذلك أبو الحسن علي بن أبي طالب وقال السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله فقلت وعليك السلام يا أبا الحسن ويا أمير المؤمنين فقال يا فاطمة إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة أخي وابن عمي رسول الله فقلت نعم هو مع ولديك تحت الكساء فأقبل علي نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء قال له وعليك السلام يا أخي ويا وسيي وخليفتي وصاحب لبائي قد أذنت لك فدخل علي تحت الكساء ثم أتيت نحو الكساء وقلت السلام عليك يا أبتاه يا رسول الله أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء قال وعليك السلام يا بنتي ويا بضعتي قد أذنت لك ودخلت تحت الكساء فلما اكتملنا جميعا تحت الكساء أخذ بي رسول الله بطرفي الكساء وأمي بيده اليمنى إلى السماء وقال اللهم إن هؤلاء أهل بيتي وخاصتي وحامتي لحمهم لحمي ودمهم دمي يؤلمني ما يؤلمهم ويحزنني ما يحزنهم أنا حرب لمن حاربهم والسلم لمن سالمهم وعدو لمن عاداهم ومحب لمن أحبهم إنهم مني وأنا منهم فاجعل صلواتك وبركاتك ورحمتك وغفرانك ورضوانك علي وعليهم وأذهب عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وقال الله عز وجل يا ملائكتي ويا سكان سماواتي إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدحية ولا قمر منير ولا شمس مضية ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحر يجري ولا فلك يسري إلا في محبة هؤلاء الخمسة الذين هم تحت الكساء وقال الأمين جبرائيل يا رب ومن تحت الكساء فقال عز وجل هم أهل بيت النبوة ومعدن الرسالة هم فاطمة وأبوها وبعلها وبنوها اللهم صل على محمد فقال جبرائيل يا ربي أتأذن لي أن أحبط إلى الأرض ليكون معهم سادسا فقال الله نعم قد أذنت لك فهبط الأمين جبرائيل وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله العلي الأعلى يقرئك السلام ويخصك بالتحية والإكرام ويقول لك وعزتي وجلالي إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدحية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضية ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا لأجلكم ومحبتكم وقد أذن لي أن أدخل معكم فهل تأذن لي يا رسول الله فقال رسول الله وعليك السلام يا أمين وحي الله إنه نعم قد أذنت لك فدخل جبرائيل معنا تحت الكساء فقال لأبي إن الله قد أوحى إليكم يقول إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد فقال علي لأبي يا رسول الله أخبرني ما لجلوسنا هذا تحت الكساء من فضل عند الله. فقال النبي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني برسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيعتنا ومحبينا إلا ونزلت عليهم الرحمة وحفت بهم الملائكة واستغفرت لهم إلى أن يتفرقوا. فقال علي إذن والله فزنا وفاز شيعتنا ورب الكعبة. فقال النبي ثانيا يا علي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني بالرسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيعتنا ومحبينا وفيهم مهموم إلا وفرج الله هما ولا مغموم إلا وكشف الله غما ولا طالب حاجة إلا وقضى الله حاجته. فقال علي إذن والله فزنا وسعدنا وكذلك شيعتنا فازوا وسعدوا في الدنيا والآخرة ورب الكعبة. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان. الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان. والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجان من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. رب المشرقين ورب المغربين فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. وله الجوار المنشآت في البحر كالأعلام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ يسأله من في السماوات والأرض كل يوم هو في شأن. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ سنفرغ لكم أيها الثقلان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ يا معشر الجن والإنس إن استطعتم أن تنفذوا من أقطار السماوات والأرض فانفذوا لا تنفذون إلا بسلطان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ يرسل عليكم شواظ من نار ونحاس فلا تنتصران. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ فإذا انشقت السماء فكانت وردة كالدحان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ فيومئذ لا يسأل عن ذنبه إنس ولا جان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ يعرف المجرمون بسيماهم فيؤخذ بالنواسي والأقدام. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ هذه جهنم التي يكذب بها المجرمون يطوفون بينها وبين حميم آن. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ ولمن خاف مقام ربه جنتان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ ذواتا أفنان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ فيهما عينان تجريان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ فيهما من كل فاكهة زوجان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ متكئين على فرش بطائنها من استبرق وجنى الجنتين دان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ فيهن قاصرات الطرف لم يطمثهن إنس قبلهم ولا جان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ كأنهن الياقوت والمرجان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان؟ فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ ومن دونهما جنتان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ مدحامتان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ فيهما عينان نضاختان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ فيهما فاكهة والنخل والرمان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ فيهن خيرات حسان. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ حور مقصورات في الخيام. فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان؟ لم يتمثهن إنس قبلهم ولا جان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان متكئين على رفرف خضر وأبقري حسان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان تبارك اسم ربك ذي الجلال والإكرام صدق الله العلي العظيم. سورة المباركة الفاتحة.
محمد وآل محمد صلوات صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. Mu'minin, tonight's Milad Majlis is sponsored by the family of Marhum Al-Haj Ramzan Ali Muhammad Ali Walji for the Saleh Sawab of Marhum Ramzan Ali Muhammad Ali Walji, Marhum Muhammad Ali Bhai Walji, Marhuma Maryam Bhai Muhammad Ali Walji, Marhuma Shirin Bhai Muhammad Ali Walji, Marhuma Salma Bhai Walji, Marhuma Kulsum Bhai Bhimji, Marhum Ali Bhai Bhimji, Marhum Akbar Bhai Padani, Marhum Muhammad Karim Rahmatullah and Kul Marhumins. You humbly requested to recite Surah Fatiha for Kul Marhumins. Al-Fatiha. Bismillah.
الصلوات. नारे तकबीर, नारे रिसालत, नारे हैदरी, नवीद विलादत की हरसू है दुम वो आली उम्मा, नवीद विलादत की हरसू है दुम वो आली उम्मा, जो है जान सीने इमाम रज़ा इमाम उम्मा, जो है जान सीने इमाम रज़ा इमाम उम्मा, इमाम मोहम्मद तकी बीते का है वही बाकरम, इमाम मोहम्मद तकी बीते का है वही बाकरम, खुशी है फलक पर मलक भी बहम सरे मोहतरम, खुशी है फलक पर मलक भी बहम सरे मोहतरम, है घर में इमाम रज़ा के खुशी पुरखुश कदम, है घर में इमाम रज़ा के खुशी पुरखुश कदम, हर सर सब्ज जिससे से वो अब्रे करम आज पैदा हुए। सलवात।
पर मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम. Mu'minin, we are very honored to have Sayyid Ammar Ali Naqvi for tonight's Wiladat Majlis. Please let's welcome with the loudest Nare Salawat.
आवाज़े बुलंद सलवात
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق الأجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا حبيبنا حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله أما بعد فقد قال الله في كتابه مبين أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها صلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum, respected brothers and sisters and dear scholars. And first and foremost, I congratulate all of you, alhamdulillah, upon the tawfiq that we have to sit together and celebrate the wiladat of our dear Imam, Imam Muhammad al-Taqiyya Jawad, for his sha'an. Can we have a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad? Allahumma salli ala. When it comes to a biographical understanding of the later Ma'asumeen, respected brothers and sisters, I find that we seem to have somewhat of a dwindling understanding. What do I mean by this? When it comes to Imam Ali, alhamdulillah, we all have a good understanding of birth to death. When it comes to Imam Hassan also, we can see in a biographical manner, there is not much ambiguity when it comes to his life. Alhamdulillah, we have the tawfiq when it comes to Imam Husaini alayhi salam to understand each element of his life and each element of his journey. However, as we go from third to fourth and fourth to fifth and fifth all the way to the ninth that we are celebrating today, we see that sometimes there is a lack of understanding or a lack of appreciation for these individuals that we revere. And this lack of appreciation is something that is not to their detriment, but rather the lack of appreciation is something to our detriment. What do I mean by this? I think it's important for us, first and foremost, to take a bit of a step back and look at why is it that we celebrate a wilada in the first place? Why is it that we commemorate a shahada in the first place? So specifically looking at Imam Jawad today, we have the tawfiq to be able to celebrate. And I use the tawfiq word very specifically and explicitly. Is it not a tawfiq, respected brothers and sisters, to know that such an individual exists? Is it not a tawfiq, respected brothers and sisters, to know that such an individual is a person that we can learn from, is a person that we can grow from, is a person that we can develop from? I ask you, in every corner of life, in every stretch of the world, we see that individuals are after role models, are they not? They're after some fragrance of excellence that they can see, they can imitate, they can emulate, and then they can move on. However, us, alhamdulillah, in the school of the Ahlul Bayt, we do not need to search far. We do not need to search wide. We simply look at the Ma'asumeen and the Imams that came before us. And we see within inside them is the perfect treatise of character. Within inside them is the perfect treatise of akhlaq. Within inside them we understand what it means to have patience, what it means to oppose desires, what it means to actually have taqwa, what it means to actually be God conscious. We see that we do not need to go into these very large, complicated philosophical and theological doctrines. But we say that this is a virtue of goodness and this is a virtue of evil. Rather, we simply point to an individual such as the ninth Imam alayhi salam and say, within him is goodness and within him is virtue. Therefore, whatever he possesses, this is an individual that I must follow. And whatever he stays away from, these are things that I must abhor from too. Therefore, when we look at a wilada, we see that this isn't just something that we sit here and celebrate, correct? For example, if it was a birthday of an insignificant individual, that would just be the marking of an event, right? However, when we look at the wilada of a ma'soom, when we look at the wilada of an individual as eminent, as the ninth Imam alayhi salam, we see that the purpose of celebrating the wilada is not just to pay our allegiances, but rather the purpose of celebrating a wilada is for us to learn from the lives, take examples from the akhlaq, and leave the room with at least one additional sifa than we had when we walked in. If this is the case, we've been successful in celebrating the wilada of this particular amount. If not, we simply gathered in a room, we listened to an individual talk for an extended period of time, and we continued with our day-to-day life. However, inshallah, what I hope to cover today in the short time that we have together is looking at the life of the particular Imam. What is it that I'm supposed to actually grow and develop from? And when we look at the improvement of an individual's akhlaq and the improvement of an individual's behavior, we see, I ask you, brothers and sisters, is this not the very purpose of life? Is this not the entire purpose of why Nabi Adam came down, the finality of prophethood? Everyone in between, they all came to perfect our akhlaq, was it not? Therefore, when we look at the notion of ethics and when we look at the notion of akhlaq, we see this isn't a secondary discussion, but rather the purpose of our life, the fulfillment of our life, the inshallah, the satisfaction that we are going to get over the 60, 70, 80, 90 years that we hope to live is going to be entirely based upon these things. Therefore, we look at these individuals as individuals of reverence, and then we take from their lives particular case studies. What can I take from this individual's life in order to increase my own ma'rifah? What can I take from this individual's life in order to get closer towards Kamal myself? What can I take from this individual's life so that I can ultimately get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What? We've heard about these individuals our whole lives. What can we say? When I listen the name of Imam Jawad alayhi salam, this is a lesson I take from his life. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma. This now needs to be the basis of our inquiry, respected brothers and sisters. This is the name of the Imam and this is what I've taken from his life. This is the name of the Ma'soom and this is what I've taken from her life. We see that this is not an exercise and an activity in remembrance, but rather this is an exercise and activity in application. It's only when we apply the lessons of the Ma'soomeen have their sacrifices been worthwhile. It's only when we apply the lessons of the Ma'soomeen has everything they have gone through been for a reason. We see that they didn't go what they went through simply so that we sit here and commemorate them. But rather they went through what they went through so that we can apply the principles of their lives, because that's what they fought to maintain. And that's what they fought to preserve. They fought to preserve and maintain the principles of the truth themselves. And if the principles of the truth themselves are not maintained, I ask you, what purpose does commemoration serve? What purpose does celebration serve? What purpose does a Wiladat serve? And what purpose does a Shahada serve? Therefore, in today's inshallah discussion, we will be trying to see what can we take away from the life of this particular Imam, of which we can take away much. And in order to do this, I will be extracting a particular tradition of his and then hopefully opening that up for the duration of our discussion. If the respected brothers and sisters are with me, can we begin with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad? Allahumma salli ala. Respected brothers and sisters, we learn in multiple ways. There are individuals who say that people learn through punishment. If I punish someone, they'll not do it, right? There are some individuals that say that they learn by reward. If I give an individual a reward, then they will continue that habit that we want them to continue. So, if we understand that these are two ways of an individual learning, we understand that there is also a third theory. There was an individual by the name of Albert Bandura, and he introduced something called social learning theory. He said it's not punishment or reward that makes people learn, but rather is observing through behavior that allows us to learn. When we observe a particular individual's behavior, we take away traits that we deem are good, and we leave traits that we think are bad. We take in traits that we think are going to be beneficial, and we get rid of traits that we think are going to be detrimental. Therefore, when we look at this particular theory, we see this has the most weight when it comes to how an individual actually learns. So bringing this back to the Ma'soomeen, we see that if we are to look at the life of the ninth Imam alayhi salam, we see that by observing this Imam, that is how we are going to actually acculturate the actions, right? It's not by fear of punishment. If you don't do this, you're going to go to hell. It's not by, this greed for reward. If you do this, you're going to go to heaven. This is the way, unfortunately, a lot of our education ends, where we say that, it's either fear of hell or, inshallah, desire for Jannah, that an individual is embarking upon this journey of life and trying to seek the truth to the highest degree. We see that our dear Imam himself, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, has mentioned very eloquently that this is the worship of a slave. This isn't the worship of a free man. This is the worship of a slave. This isn't the worship of Ashraf al-Makhluqat, where you have been designed and designated above all creation, above the malaik and above the ajannah. We see that this worshipping in the form of an individual doing it for the sake of something that they will be rewarded for, or not doing it because they don't want to get punished, this is not something that we have been created for. We're underselling ourselves, respected brothers and sisters. We see that the purpose of our lives, inshallah, is to attain the utmost degree of perfection and excellence. The utmost degree of it. And we see when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has enlisted us with certain duties, we see that the purpose of these duties is not so that we get a reward or stay away from a punishment, but rather we do it for the sake of proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the very pursuit itself. Therefore, when we look at the Ma'soom and we apply social learning theory to the ninth Imam himself, alayhi salam, we see that by observing the behaviors of these individuals, we then attain the behaviors within inside ourselves. Therefore, reinforcing our previous discussion where I said the Wiladat is not simply a celebration that is hollow, but rather the Wiladat is an observation of behavior, so that we look at the life of this particular Ma'soom and we apply those lessons within inside ourselves. So biographically speaking, I can speak for the entire discussion on the life of the Imam himself. However, as I said, it's important for us to scrutinize and microanalyze a particular part because, mashallah, wherever you look, there's barakah. We see that he attained Imam at 8 years old. And he had one of the shortest lifespans of all of the Ma'soomeen. He passed away, some scriptures state, at 25. This was a very difficult time, we see, for Islam. And we see that in the Abbasid government, of course, these individuals were trying to curry favor with the people of that time. And they saw that the individuals had a lot of love for the Ahlul Bayt. They saw that they had a lot of love for the Ahlul Bayt, so they said it's better we keep them with us rather than against us. We look at the people that came before, and we look at Imam Rada alayhi salam. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And we see Imam Rada, he was an individual who was forced to act within a position of the government of that time, and he left then, of course, the Imams that came after. So Imam Jawad had to assume this imamate at the ripe young age of 8, and we see it wasn't without brilliance. We see when it came to his debates, when it came to his dialogue, when it came to his rhetoric, when it came to his writing, we see that even in the short lifespan, there is a lot an individual can look at and admire. However, what did I say? A wilada is not simply just blind admiration. A wilada is an opportunity for us to grow and develop. This is the purpose of the Ma'soomeen. This is the purpose of the Anbiya. This is the purpose of 124,000 prophets. Is the purpose of the successorship of the Prophet. We don't need to reinforce the fact that they are brilliant because they are. The purpose of them coming is so that we can take something away from their lives. When we look at Imam Jawad alayhi salam, we see that one particular tradition that really resonated with me, and I think inshallah will make the topic of the remainder of our discussion, is there was a companion that came in the presence of the Imam. And the companion, what did he do? As anyone would do if they're in the presence of the Imam. He said, the tradition begins, can I ask you, oh Imam Jawad, for some advice? That's a good start to a tradition, is it not? You know, Imam Jawad is now going to give us something good, something with substance, something with vigor, something that we can take away. Oh Imam, can I ask you for some advice? What do you think the Imam responded with? The things about the Ma'soomeen, and inshallah, if we have the tawfiq, we can read ahadith more. Sometimes it's not necessarily what is said in the ahadith. It's how the Imam approaches the topic that really gives away, the true matlab, the true meaning of the matter. So if an individual was to come for advice, you would give them, as for example, alhamdulillah, we had the tawfiq a few days ago to celebrate a marriage here. When someone comes to you for advice, what advice would you like to give for marriage? You give the best advice you think that you can give for marriage, right? Based upon your years of experience. If I was to take a survey, the number one answer is usually compromise, right? On both sides. You have to compromise in order to have a successful marriage. In Qom, they say the same as well when we were studying in the Hawza. However, my teacher said the husband must compromise and the wife must compromise, but the husband's compromise usually looks like taking the opinion of the wife's side, and the wife's opinion is usually that of retaining her own. So therefore, compromises not necessarily as egalitarian as it may seem. So when we look at opinions, the Imam was asked, can you give me some advice? What did the Imam respond with? Are you going to listen? That was his response. Think about this, brothers. Are you going to listen to my advice? Are you going to apply my advice? Are you going to think about my advice? Are you actually going to do something about it? Or are you just coming here and you're asking for my advice and you're wasting my time and you're wasting yours as well? This is a very important part of the tradition. He said, please give me some advice. He said, are you going to listen to it? Respected brothers and sisters, how much time have we spent trying to force our opinion down the throats of others? How much time have we actually spent trying to bring the horse to the water? How much time have we actually spent out of the goodness of your own hearts, out of the goodness of our own hearts, trying to make sure that an individual does something because we think that's the thing that's best for them? However, the Imam in his infallibility and the Imam in his hikmah and the Imam in his ilm, what does he first say? Are you even going to take this advice, or am I going to speak for no reason? So I think the first dars akhlaq is given to us before the tradition actually begins. And that dars is this. That when an individual is there for nasiha, when an individual is there for advice, when an individual is there in order to give you a better direction, you must first make sure that you are in a position to apply that advice. And second, you must make sure that you have purified yourself in order to accept it. So therefore, before the tradition begins, Imam gives us a very deep lesson in human psychology, where it states that we must not force or condone any opinion of ours in a way that would be unhealthy for the other individual. If they are not ready for that advice, do not give it to them. If they are not prepared for that advice, don't force it down to them. And we can see the case with children as well. Sometimes the parents want the best for their children, right? And we see there's a forcing down of a particular perspective and a viewpoint. However, what can we see in this saying of the Ma'asum? We can see he is saying that, are you ready for the advice in the first place? Are you prepared for the advice in the first place? And if you are not, then our conversation ends there. And if you are, then our conversation continues. So the dars akhlaq that we take away in the tradition from the Imam is this, that we must always, when it comes to nasiha, we've all, I think, in this room, been in the position of receiving very unwarranted advice at times, right? So we're sitting there and someone comes and says, I want to give you a nasiha. I'm like, first of all, did I ask for nasiha? And second of all, are we both in a position to be giving nasiha to one another? There's a measure, right? So there's a stick. For example, if I don't believe that I'm capable of receiving this nasiha from an individual, I would say that this is probably not the best point in time for us to have this conversation. However, if I believe that I am and it comes from a good place and therefore we are both with sincere intentions trying to move closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that, respected brothers and sisters, is the correct point and place for nasiha. The tradition continues. It was asked, can you give some advice? And he responded, well, are you ready for this advice? And the individual responded with, naively or not naively so, yes. So the Imam gives some particular points. And these particular points, honestly, if we were simply to microanalyze the nasiha that was given here and apply it to our lives, there would be no longer need for any dars akhlaq, any bahth kharij, any point where we need to strive for a higher being, because we see that all of it is concluded and all of it is summarized within inside this particular tradition. As with all the traditions of the Ma'asumeen, it's us who have difficulties understanding it. It's not them who have difficulty explaining it. He states, and he begins, point number 1 of the advice, rely upon patience, sabr. The first point of advice that I would like to give to you is relying upon patience. When we rely upon patience, respected brothers and sisters, we see that patience is an attribute we understand is important. And patience is an attribute we understand has weight. However, do we understand how much importance and weight it truly has? I think if we take ourselves to the event of Mi'raj of our dear Prophet, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, Allahumma salli alayhi. The traditions of Mi'raj are incredibly important because this is a literal dialogue between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Rasulullah. So he goes on Mi'raj and he asks a particular question. The question that is asked is, what is the first act of worship? A huge question. Huge question. Insurmountable. What is the first act of worship? And remember, this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Rasulullah. It doesn't get higher than this. What is the first act of worship and what's the first act of ibadah? If we're running through our minds, salah would definitely be on the list. If we're running through our minds, hajj and zakat would definitely be on the list. We'd be going through the furu'id-din in a particular order. What was the response by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, azza wa jal? He said silence and fasting are the first acts of prayer. What correlation? What's this got to do with anything? Surely salah? Surely something? Surely doing? Surely we spend all of our time, acting and doing something, but rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying silence and fasting. What's unique about silence and fasting, respected brothers and sisters? What's unique about these two particular things? And look at the hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in bringing these 2 points out as the first acts of worship. We see when it comes to ibadah, we always think it's action, do we not? If I do 100 rak'ah, if I, for example, give this much khubz, if I give this much zakat, we think it's action, we think it's doing. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala very beautifully in the first act of ibadah says what? He says rather the first act of worship is not doing, but the first act of worship is abstaining. The first act of worship is staying away. The first act of worship is not doing anything. We think it's by the doing, by the overdoing, by the action that we're going to get this kamal. But rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, sometimes you need to stop and think. Stop and think, contemplate, understand, be in silence. Right? Because if we look at silence, that's a non-action, right? Is the non-action of speaking. When we look at fasting, what's this? A non-action. It's the non-action of eating. So he's given us 2 non-actions, and we see this theme is existent throughout Islamic literature. لا إله إلا الله ما رأيت إلا جميلا أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. There is this element and this aspect and this insistence upon the purification first. Because we see in Surah Jummah that we read every single week, Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Rasulullah's duties as 2. وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُم. To purify the people and then to teach them. When I first came across this tradition, I was very confused. I said, surely education is purification, is it not? If someone teaches you, that's your purification. If someone teaches you, you increase in knowledge. But no, these are 2 separate journeys. One must purify and then educate. One must cleanse and then fill. One must clean and then decorate. We see that this dual process is existent within inside the religion of Islam. And it's sometimes not in the doing, but rather sometimes in the abstaining that we find the highest degree of value. Sometimes it's not in the doing, but rather in the staying away that we find the greatest proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in this era of materialism and outputs and KPIs, and you must get this amount of sales by the end of the month, we think that the only way we can attain, the only way we can get is if we have these marked targets at the end of the month. But rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying it's far greater than this. It's far greater than this. It's not an output generated religion, but rather it's a process generated religion. We see that it's the journey, it's the purification, it's the tazkiyah. It's how far we get on the path that actually defines our success. It's not how many boxes we've ticked at the end of our lives, but rather to what depth have we actually gone in finding our own souls and therefore finding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Man arafa nafsa faqad arafa rabbah. Whoever knows themselves, they know their Lord. It's the depth of the exploration rather than the breadth of what we're trying to look for. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So it begins with rely upon patience. Patience, as I mentioned, is a non-action, right? It's an abstinence. We're staying away from something. And in our lives, I think it's important for us to, instead of just relying, I'm not now negating the importance of action. I'm exaggerating the importance of non-action, because this itself is an important prerequisite to what it is that we do. What value is a salah of an individual if the purification of the mind is not there? What value of the zakat of an individual if the purification of the mind is not there? We can see that if our intentions are incorrect, all of the a'mal are not going to be for any use. The salah, the hajj, the zakat, however, if our intentions are correct, our tazkiyah is correct, our purification is correct, our non-action is truly in place, then we can see the action itself leads us to a higher spirituality. When an individual asks, I've been praying for 30, 40, 50 years. Why do I not feel this spirituality? I've been fasting for how many decades? Why do I not feel this qurbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Why? We've been promised a maqam higher than the malaik. Why do I still feel like an individual tied to their maddi jism, to their material body. Because our purification, our tazkiyah, our silence, our abstinence is something that's not really been focused upon. So therefore, the entire majlis can be on this point, but we must finish the tradition. The first point of advice that the Imam gave was rely upon patience. The second point he gave was a very interesting one, and a very unpopular one in our current day consensus. Welcome poverty. The second part of advice that was given by the Ma'asum was welcome poverty. When we see this, now individuals say, is this now a demonization of wealth? By no means. If we look at the Ma'asumin, if we look at the Imams, we see these were individuals who lived in a particular manner. However, what is this? Welcome poverty. It means that wealth no longer has a hold over you. Wealth no longer has a bind over you. It's not going to be the case where you are losing sleep, you are treating people around you with disrespect, you are not treating your children properly, you're not treating your wife properly, your husband properly, simply because of financial means and simply because of financial matters. Therefore, when the Imam says welcome poverty, he says be very comfortable with it. Because if it comes, I ask you, does God cease to exist? I ask you, if poverty comes, is there no Lord anymore? I ask you, if poverty comes, do the ma'asumin now simply fade away? By no means. Where's our tawakkul? By no means. Where's our faith? So what he means by welcome poverty is says that we must have so much tawakkul to the extent that, God forbid, this event does happen, our iman does not change by a single %. What does the Imam say? He states that if the veils of the ghaib were taken away in front of me, my iman would not change. It would not change. There would be no difference whatsoever. However, us forget the iman of the ghaib, the veils of the ghaib, the veils of the dunya, if they were taken away, then we would be in a bit of a difficult spot. So, when we see this, it's an important point for us to understand that when they are saying welcome poverty, we need to make sure that we position ourselves in a way where we do not worship money. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about worshipping the idols in the Quran, He is not talking about the idols made of stone or wood and now we're bowing down to them. No. These are the idols of our ego. These are the idols of our nafs. These are the idols of wealth. The idols of social media, right? The idols that we currently engage in on a day-to-day basis. And my favorite currency is time, right? Because time is the only currency that all of us share. So therefore, we must ask the question, what do we spend the most time on? If most of our time is spent on social media for frivolous purposes, congratulations, this has now become your Lord. If most of our time is now spent on pursuing money, simply for the sake of pursuing money, congratulations, this has now become your Lord. So this is the greatest litmus. However, all of these things, as you can see quite beautifully, can be redirected. If you simply change your niyyah, your intention, the non-action, as I said primarily, all these things become a vehicle for you to attain kamal. However, in a current landscape, if you are simply spending time with them for no ends, for no means, for no other means than to simply attain them or to use them, we see of a Lord, of a God in our life. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about in the Holy Quran, where He says that do not ascribe partners to me. I am the person who gives you your rizq, not your employer. I am the person who gives you safety. It's not your house, not your alarm system. I am the individual. I am the entity who provides all of this for you. Understand that all of these are nothing but wasilas for me to allow you to attain these benefits. Therefore, we see number 2, welcoming poverty is an aspect that the Imam introduces in his advice. And we can see that this particular point is of incredible relevance in the modern age, which inshallah again requires another discussion. Before the third point, if I have your attention, can we have a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad? Point number 3, control carnal desires. Isn't this a heavy one? Control carnal desires, if it was only so easy. My teacher of theology in Hausa, he said that the code word for a young man who has attained bulugh in Iran is to ask for the risala, is to ask for the tawdih al-masail, So he said that I had now attained the state of bulugh. And I went to my father. He said, my father, he used to be a farmer. He had a tractor. So he said that he was in the midst of using this machine, and I went to him and said that I need a risala. And he said that he turned off the tractor, and this is the first and the last bit of advice that he ever gave me. He said that you are an individual where if you stay away from all that which is haram and do all that which is wajib, you will attain the highest peaks of ma'rifah and kamal in your life. And he said that if only I followed this advice. And it sounds so easy on the off chance, right? Okay, I have a list of things and this I shouldn't do and this I should. But we see that the shaitan is not foolish. We see our nafs is not weak. These things that are so clear that you should not do this and do this. And again, is not so that the Lord will be pleased for you. We think we keep on taking it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if a'udhu billah, He needs our worship. By no means. The staying away and the abstinence is for our own kamal. It is for our own benefit. It is for our own salvation. It's for us to attain a higher degree of excellence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says you must control yourself in order to attain. And we understand this in every other dimension of life. However, when it comes to religion, all of us are now in confusion, right? If you want to be an athlete, you must stay away from bad food. You must go out early in the morning for runs. You must make sure that you spend time in the gym. You must make sure that you spend time with your trainer. You must restrict yourself from going outside. You must restrict yourself from going to parties. You must restrict, right? There is a clear list of haram and there's a clear list of halal for an athlete or for an individual who wants to engage in any particular field of life. However, when it comes to religion, now everything becomes confusing. But why? Why is this particular thing halal? And why is this particular thing haram? And why do we need to follow it in this manner? And why do we need to follow in that manner? We see that all of this is rooted down to a lack of tawakkul, that we don't truly believe. That we don't truly believe. When it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we did, I ask you, would we question any of the ahkam for 1 second? For 1 second. If I had a trainer, right, coming back to our athlete's example, and I had 100% certainty in this individual, if he tells me that I need to do this particular set of exercise for the next 3 weeks, am I going to question him? Absolutely not. You're going to engage in it. I ask you, does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala know an individual who knows us far greater than any human, far greater than our own mother, far greater than our own father, is closer to us than our jugular vein? I ask you, is He not this entity? Is He not the Lord of all the worlds? And if He is, and we have acknowledged Him as such, the ahkam would make a lot more sense. So therefore, to avoid carnal desires, we see that an individual must become this muttaqi that we are seeking. And when we look at the Holy Quran, it makes it very clear. Surah Baqarah, what does it state? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Correct? I ask you, brothers, this book is a guidance for who? A book is a guidance for those who are looking? The book is a guidance for those, who are lost? No. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. This book is a guidance for those who are of the muttaqeen. So when individuals say, I'm reading the Quran to become a muttaqi, and the Quran is telling me that this book is only good for you if you already are a muttaqi, it's the chicken and the egg. What comes first? The ayah is saying this book is only of benefit to an individual who is a muttaqi. The opening lines, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابَ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. This book is only a guidance. This book is a guidance for those who are of the muttaqi. So now what do we do here? I'm reading this book to become a muttaqi, and this book is telling me I need to become muttaqi first to read it. What do we do? The answer and the advice is given to us by Imam Ja'far Sadiq. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Makes it very clear. He says, what is a muttaqi? Right? We say it a lot, we use it a lot. There's quite a lot of bad translations for muttaqi as well. There's been a few Shia organizations who tried to use the word muttaqi in their branding, and they've translated it so badly where, it's got nothing to do with the taqwa that has been listed in the Quran. But what muttaqi is an entire separate discussion. However, in this particular tradition, we see that Imam Ja'far Sadiq mentions very clearly. We think a muttaqi is someone who goes on the mountains and is in the midst of spirituality. They're doing a tasbih all day, all night. They are not engaging in things that are not coming or going anywhere. By no means. Imam Ja'far Sadiq says a muttaqi is an individual who stays away from the haram and does that which is wajib. Wa akhir da'wana. That's it. There's no complicated adhkar. There's no complicated, you must spend 7 years with Ayatul Bahshat Marhum, and then only after that can you attain this degree of ma'rifah. No. He says, stay away from the muharramat and do that which is wajib. You will attain the highest degree of taqwa. And therefore, then the Quran will become a good use to you. So when we see that, an individual who stays away from the haram and does that which is wajib, they understand that there is a measure of good and a measure of bad, right? Only if you understand there's a measure of good and a measure for bad, the Quran is going to be of use to you. Only if you stay away from the muharramat and do the wajibat is the Quran actually going to be beneficial for you. An individual who is heavily engaged in sin, then I open the Quran for some sort of enlightenment, you haven't followed the roadmap in order to get to the treasure in the first place. You're simply trying to look for the treasure and you have absolutely no roadmap whatsoever. The roadmap is the Sharia. The roadmap is halal haram. And in order to get to the gold and the treasure that the Quran has to us, the only way through it is the Sharia. The only way through it is halal haram. And we understand that, the depths of the knowledge in the Quran are endless. The Marajit say that it's like, use the analogy of a beach. That sometimes kids go to the beach and they take something off the sand and they think that it's valuable. Some people get something from the sea, like fish, and they say that that's more valuable. Some individuals, they go right, deep sea divers, they go to the bottom, they get a pearl, and they find something even more valuable. This is the Quran. The more you keep on going, the more benefit and value you would find from it. However, remember, it's not just about the destination as we spoke about in the beginning. It's about the abstinence, it's about the thought, it's about the intention, it's about the method by which we get there. It's not the amal, but rather the amal and the niyyah. It's not the action, but rather it's the action and the preceding intention. That being said, we see the point of avoiding carnal desires now comes to an end. And the Imam continues his advice. The penultimate piece of advice that he gives is that you must not pay attention to your whims, your hawa, the hawa and nafs, right? We see that a lot of the points in our lives and a lot of the difficulties that come as a result of the hawa that we have, right? We see that an individual is sitting, no issue, and then there's a whisper that comes in our ear, and we have all been in that position. Why not? That why not? Or how many pitfalls have we fallen in because of that why not? Let me just do this. What difference does it make if I go there? What difference does it make if I go there? What difference does it make if I speak to this individual disrespectfully? What difference does it make if I just don't do this for one particular moment? Yes? When we look at these temptations that are being whispered in our ear, we see that ultimately we know what the right thing is. Right? Very few cases when I have to deal with members of the community, I feel that I have to convince them that something is right and something is wrong. They know. They know what's right and they know what's wrong. However, they're simply trying to justify their own position to make that right or wrong. However, the underlying precedent of the truth is incredibly clear that they do know what that is. The only thing that can deviate us is what? The whims. And don't think these whims are something that are limited to low individuals such as me. We see when it comes to the ulama and the urafa, they're the individuals who struggle with the whims the most. They have the most deviation and temptation. They say that the shaitan comes to us in ways and try and deceive us in ways where you could not even imagine. You could not even imagine. We see that one particular alim, his student had a dream where he saw these large chains. And these large chains were being used by shaitan. And he said that, what are these chains for? He said, these chains are for your teacher. I'm trying to get him down and drag him back towards the dunya. And he says, okay, but why are you getting more? And he said, I'm getting more because whatever I'm throwing upon your teacher, it's not working. Any chain that I put on him, he breaks. Any chain that I put on him, he breaks. And then the student said, what about us? Where are our chains? He was hoping of a chain of the equal density. He said, you don't need a chain. You're doing my work for me. You don't need any temptation whatsoever. As soon as you move in a particular direction, you get distracted and deviated, and there is no longer control of the nafs. We see, brothers, it is the control of the nafs. We see it's the control of the self that defines us as human beings. Only if we have true mastery over ourselves, true control over ourselves, can we say that we have attained the purpose of humanhood. The purpose of humanity is for us to be individuals who are animals, animalistic, who simply respond to desires. As soon as I smell something, I move that way. As soon as I see something, I move in that direction. Or is it for me to have control over my nafs, control over my soul, control over my actions, control over what I say, over what I eat, over what I speak, over what I listen to, over what I act upon? Is this the purpose of life? Or is simply following our animalistic desires and tendencies? The choice is yours. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you the availability. He says that you can attain a maqam higher than the malaik or lower than the animals. The choice is entirely yours. However, we see when it comes to control as men, when it comes to control as women, we need to make sure that we uphold the virtue and the values of humanity and understand that these things are beneath us, being pulled away by desire. What are we, children? As soon as we hear something, we get moved away. Even within, there are children who have higher degrees of restraints than, unfortunately, a lot of adults, because they understand the right and wrong in a lot of instances. However, when it comes to control, we see that we must be in control of the situation. We must never allow the situation to be in control of us. So that being said, we see that the student then went back to the teacher and said, listen, I saw this dream. Can you do the ta'bir of it? Can you derive the dream? And he said that, I know exactly what you're alluding to. He said, what? He said, I went to collect khums money. When I went to collect khums money, on the way home, I remember my wife told me that we ran out of yogurt, right? In Hausa, in Iran, the staple diet is bread and yogurt, right? And if you're lucky, some vegetables is the holy combo of three. So he said that I need to pick up some yogurt on the way home. He's like, I didn't have money, but he had the khums money. He said, okay, I'll buy it now, and then I'll go home, and then I'll replace it, and that's it. So he said, I was entering the store, and then he said, what if death comes to me now? No one would know. And I would die madyun, and I would die in debt. And therefore, he said, I went back home, got the amount that I needed, came back, and we were moving forward. Look at the intricacy of the control. He was absolutely in control of his nafs, of his self, of every element of his being. That's what if this is happening. The ihtiyat is on the highest degree. This is what we need to strive towards. We see that this was the chain that he put on. It was a very beautiful chain that shaitan put on. His khums money doesn't mean anything. You're going to replace it anyway. However, he understands that this is also one of the tools of deviation, one of the tools of the shayateen. So we must make sure that we stay aloof from it. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We bring our bahth and discussion to an end. Respected brothers and sisters, with the final piece of advice that Imam Jawad, Imam Taqi, Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala. Has given. That was the final point that he gave about the desire. And then he concluded the tradition by saying that to live as if God is present amongst you. Live as if God is present amongst you. And I ask you, respected brothers and sisters, we believe in a God, we confess to God, we testify the wahda of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, if we truly had yaqeen that a God existed, would we engage in any sin? In any sin. Right? Sometimes we engage in sin, but if our father is there, we won't do it. Right? Sometimes we would engage in sin, or if our mother is in the room, we wouldn't do it because we can see them, they're present, they're clear, they're existing, are they not? However, I ask you, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not eternal? Is He not existent? Is He not qa'im? Is He not da'im? Is He not there? So therefore, if we engage in sin, can we come to the conclusion that we are not very firm on our faith in regards to He is always there, He is always eternal, and He is always existent? Because if we were, we wouldn't have the jur'at to engage in the things that we do. We wouldn't have the audacity to engage in the sins that we do. If we were truly convinced 100%, I truly had yaqeen that there is a Lord, He is existent, He is present, He is listening, He is seeing, we see that I would bring myself in a particular manner. We can see the sisters have this. For example, the reverts and the converts with hijab. They say that when I wear hijab, I feel like I need to act in a particular manner, right? Because I feel like I am not just an ambassador or representative, but rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has given me this tawfiq of wearing the hijab, and I'm now being viewed in a particular way, therefore I am acting in a particular way. I'm not saying this is the purpose of the hijab, however, it's one of the secondary derivatives and benefits. But nonetheless, we see that if we are certain that an individual is witnessing us, or we are certain an entity is witnessing us, we see our behavior comes into line and comes into order. So therefore, the greatest litmus test to see the degree of our iman, and the greatest litmus test to see the degree of my faith, is to see that am I engaging in sin? And if I am, then do I truly have certainty in this 100% yaqeen and tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then not only does He exist, He is constantly and consciously present. And it's not from a fear tactic, right? And I detest this argument, right? And I'm not sure if you learnt as well in the madaris growing up that there was a boy and he was told you can eat this chocolate bar if no one else is seeing you. So he went to a room and his mother saw him. And he went to another room and his father saw him. He went to this empty cupboard and a spider saw him. Then he went to this place where no one saw him, and he came back and he didn't eat the chocolate bar because he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is seeing me. Fine, but this is not the way we must envision Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? This is a very, anthropomorphic idealization of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is wujud. He is existence. It's a far deeper entity. It's not that he is this, trying to act in a policed manner. As I said, it makes no difference to him whatsoever. But rather, if we understand him as wujud, as existence, as al-hayy, as the living, then we understand that he is constantly present. And when we understand that he is constantly present, our behavior automatically autocorrects. Not out of fear, not out of someone's looking at me, but rather out of acknowledgement that there is this greater entity who has given me life. And this greater entity who has given me life and is the source of my existence has now commanded me to do certain things for my own benefit. And I must follow these things and stay away from those which I must stay away from, because he has ordered me to, because that is in the best interest of mine. That's it. Not fear, not punishment, not reward, not Jannah. No. It's simply for the sake of proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's simply for him. That's the whole purpose of life. We go through all of it, the pursuit, why we do it, halal, haram, sharia, akhlaq. It's all to get closer to him. Because he's the source of perfection. And do we not strive to be more perfect? So if I become more perfect, I move closer towards said source of perfection. So the more perfect I become, the better I become, the greater I move towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is al-haq, who is al-hayy, who has all of the asma'ul husna, who we see and we read in all of the addu'a. Therefore, my time has come to an end, and inshallah we must conclude our discussion here. That when we look at the life of Imam Jawad, Imam Taqi, alayhi salam, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, Allahumma salli ala. We see that from A to Z there are lessons that can be taken away. However, if we extrapolate this particular tradition, we see that we have been given the particular guidelines. And these guidelines have been given in a particular order. And that order is that of tazkiyah. Why these specific points? These specific points, because it goes from internal to external. It starts with our behavior, sabr. And it then moves on where we must understand what's right and what's wrong, taqwa. And then we move and develop and we see that the final product of taqwa, of sabr, of doing all of the things that he mentioned is understanding that a God exists, is conscious, is hayy, and is all around us. We see that it's an entire process from beginning to end that he is taking us through, that he is saying is representative of the human psyche, is representative of the human soul. And if we follow this from point 1 to the final point, then we will truly have attained that tazkiyat an-nafs that we have been referring to at the beginning of the lecture. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inshallah continue to grant us all the tawfiq to celebrate the wiladah of these dear ma'asumeen, to commemorate the istishhad of these dear ma'asumeen, so that we may take example and we may practically implement the lessons of their life. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never allow the dhikr of Sayyid Fatima, of Ali ibn Abi Talib, of the remainder of the ma'asumeen to leave our mouths. Not simply in remembrance, not simply in mentioning their names, but rather truly upholding the principles that they lived and died for, which were the principles of truth, which were the principles of integrity, which were the principles of haqq, underlyingly so. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant shifa to all the marid. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshaAllah, have mercy upon all the souls who have passed away. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala establish His peace all across the world, in Palestine, in Sudan, in Lebanon, and all the other countries that are struggling and suffering. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshaAllah, lengthen the lives of the maraja and the ulama, so that their, inshaAllah, shadows will continue to remain among us. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately, inshaAllah, allow us to tawfiq, to be part of the army of Imam Sahib al-Asr wa Zaman. Ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-sharif, when the time may come, and so that we may be ready. Wa akhir da'wana an alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Salawat ala Muhammad wa alihi al-tahirin. صل على محمد وآله.
أفضل الصلاة محمد وآل محمد या इमाम रज़ा मोहम्मद वाल मोहम्मद सलवात कितना मीठा कितना प्यारा नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली नाम ज़हरा और हसनैन नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली कितना मीठा कितना प्यारा नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली आज यहाँ सब खुश है सुनकर नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली आज यहाँ सब खुश है सुनकर नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली आँखों की ठंडक दिल का उजाला नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली नाम ज़हरा और हसनैन नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली हंसती अपनी इश्क़ मोहम्मद दौलत अपनी हुब्बे अली हंसती अपनी इश्क़ मोहम्मद दौलत अपनी हुब्बे अली दोनों आलम का सरमाया नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली नाम ज़हरा और हसनैन नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली मस्जिद अक़सा खाना काबा दोनों बराए आज़ादी मस्जिद अक़सा खाना काबा दोनों बराए आज़ादी देख रहे हैं आपका रास्ता नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली नाम ज़हरा और हसनैन नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली किसको सुनाए किसको पुकारे किस से कहे रूदादे अलम किसको सुनाए किसको पुकारे किस से कहे रूदादे अलम अपनों से ये पर्दा कैसा नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली नाम ज़हरा और हसनैन, नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली। दिल में हमारे हो कुरान का साया, हिफ्ज़ हमारे हो कुरान का पारा। दिल में हमारे हो कुरान का साया, हिफ्ज़ हमारे हो कुरान का पारा। दीनो अमल से घर हो रोशन, नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली। कितना मीठा कितना प्यारा, नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली। नाम ज़हरा और हसनैन, नाम मोहम्मद नाम अली। मोहम्मद व आल मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम। अल-फातिहा। ज़ियारा। अस्सलामु अलैका या रसूल अल्लाह, अस्सलामु अलैका या हबीब अल्लाह, अस्सलामु अलैका या अमीर अल-मुअमिनीन अली इब्न अबी तालिब, अस्सलामु अलैका या फ़ातिमत ज़हरा सय्यदत निसाइल आलमीन, अस्सलामु अलैका या हसन अल-मुज्तबा, अस्सलामु अलैका या अबा अब्दिल्लाह अल-हुसैन, अस्सलामु अलैका या अली इब्न अल-हुसैन ज़ैन अल-आबिदीन, अस्सलामु अलैका या मुहम्मद इब्न अली अल-बाक़िर, अस्सलामु अलैका या जाफ़र इब्न मुहम्मद अस-सादिक़, अस्सलामु अलैका या मूसा इब्न जाफ़र अल-काज़िम, अस्सलामु अलैका या अली इब्न मूसा ar-रिज़ा, अस्सलामु अलैका या मुहम्मद इब्न अली अत-तक़ी अल-जवाद, अस्सलामु अलैका या अली इब्न मुहम्मद अन-नक़ी अल-हादी, अस्सलामु अलैका या हसन इब्न अली अल-अस्करी, अस्सलामु अलैका या हुज्जत इब्न अल-हसन या साहिब अल-अस्र वज़-ज़मान, सय्यदी अल-अमान 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 मिन फ़ितनत अज़-ज़मान। अस्सलामु अलैका या खलीफत ar-रहमान, अस्सलामु अलैका या शरीक अल-क़ुरआन, अस्सलामु अलैका या कअबत अल-ईमान। अज्जलल्लाहु तआला फ़रजक व सहलल्लाहु तआला मख़रजक व ज़ुहूरक व जअलना मिन अंसारिक व अअवानिक व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातुहु। बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम। अल्लाहुम्मा कुल्लि वलिय्यिकल हुज्जत इब्निल हसन, सलवातुका अलैहि व अला आबाइहि फ़ी हाज़िहि स्साअति व फ़ी कुल्लि साअ, वलियान व हाफ़िज़ा व क़ाइदान व नासिरा व दलीलान व ऐना, हत्ता तुस्किनहु अर्ज़क तौआ व तुमत्तिअहु फ़ीहा तवीला, बिरहमतिक या अरहमर राहिमीन।